In the summer of 2012, Alisha Bromfield, a 21-year-old college student and expectant mother, joined her former boss Brian Cooper for a wedding trip she hoped would end his unwanted attention forever. Instead, it became her last night alive, when Alisha was found murdered in a quiet Wisconsin resort, her unborn daughter Ava gone with her. Investigators uncovered a chilling story of obsession and control. Her mother, Anicich, turned grief into action, fighting to change the law that failed to recognize both victims. This is the haunting story of love, loss, and the justice that demanded a voice. It was the last summer Alisha Bromfield would ever see. At 21, she was filled with the kind of energy that comes from youth and the excitement of expecting her first child. Her life was moving in a direction that made her mother proud. She was finishing her degree at Illinois State University, working hard and preparing to raise her baby girl, whom she planned to name Ava. Her friends described her as kind, loyal, and deeply responsible, someone who always tried to see the good in others. But that goodness would soon become the very thing that placed her in danger. Alisha had once worked at a local Home Depot, where her supervisor was a man named Brian Cooper. He was older, in his mid-30s, socially awkward, and known by co-workers for his unpredictable moods. Over time, he grew fixated on Alisha. He would text her constantly, offer her rides, and invite her to outings she politely declined. Alisha tried to keep things civil, avoiding confrontation while maintaining boundaries. When she left the job, she hoped the connection would fade, but Cooper didn't stop reaching out. He insisted he was only being friendly, but there was something obsessive beneath his calm words. When Cooper invited her to a wedding in Door County, Wisconsin, Alisha hesitated. He said he had no one else to go with and needed company. She knew he had feelings for her but believed she could handle it. Against her better judgment and wanting to keep the peace, she agreed to go, perhaps thinking that saying yes one last time might finally end the unwanted attention. On the drive up, the two talked about work, music, and her pregnancy. Cooper brought her small gifts, trying to impress her, but she remained distant. They arrived at a quiet lakeside resort surrounded by trees, a postcard-perfect place that seemed peaceful in daylight, but eerily isolated at night. Security footage later showed them checking in, both smiling politely at the front desk clerk. To anyone watching, they looked like ordinary guests. As evening fell, the resort was alive with music and laughter from the wedding. Alisha attended the event, keeping her distance from Cooper, who was seen drinking heavily at the reception. He grew more intoxicated as the night went on, slurring his words and glaring at anyone who spoke to her. Guests later recalled seeing him follow her out of the party toward their shared room. Sometime after midnight, everything went silent. Neighbors in nearby rooms reported faint noises. A struggle, something heavy falling, but no one thought much of it. By morning, the hallway was quiet, the sun spilling through the windows of the resort. A housekeeper making her morning rounds knocked on their door. There was no answer. When she pushed the door open slightly, she froze. Inside the room lay a scene that would forever change two families. Alisha was gone, her body lifeless. The room showed signs of violence: a shattered glass, an overturned chair, and the smell of spilled alcohol in the air. Brian Cooper was nowhere to be found. His wallet, car keys, and phone were left behind, as if he wanted the world to know who had done it. Outside, the sound of waves hitting the shore seemed too calm for the horror that had just unfolded inside. The next morning, the peaceful calm of Door County was shattered by the discovery of Alisha Bromfield's body. Police were called immediately after the resort staff stumbled upon the horrific scene. The officers who arrived at the door could instantly tell that something brutal had taken place. The room was in complete disarray. The furniture knocked over, a lamp shattered, and personal belongings scattered across the floor. The bedding was torn, and the air carried a heaviness that spoke of panic and violence. It didn't take long for investigators to realize that this was not an accident. Detectives began piecing together what happened in those final hours. The front desk clerk confirmed that both Alisha and Brian Cooper had checked in together after attending the wedding. Hotel security footage showed them walking back to their room just after midnight. Alisha appeared calm, while Cooper looked unsteady, his movements sluggish, his expression dark. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. A search began for Cooper, who had vanished sometime before morning. Officers scoured the surrounding woods and lakeshore, fearing he might flee or harm himself. It wasn't until several hours later that he was found wandering along the beach, soaked and trembling. When police approached, he didn't resist. He mumbled that he had done something terrible and wanted to drown himself. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his clothes were damp from the lake. He was taken into custody without incident. At the police station, Cooper's behavior fluctuated between confusion and cold detachment. He admitted to killing Alisha, but claimed he was too drunk to remember how. His statement was rambling and disjointed. He spoke about rejection, loneliness, and feeling abandoned. Detectives noticed he showed no genuine remorse, only self-pity. He seemed more concerned with his ruined life than the young woman he had taken from hers. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed the hotel room, collecting fingerprints, DNA samples, and photographs of every inch of the crime scene. They confirmed that Alisha had been strangled to death. There were bruises on her arms and neck, evidence that she had fought desperately for her life. The medical examiner later revealed the most heartbreaking detail. Alisha was 6.5 months pregnant. Her unborn daughter, whom she had planned to name Ava, had died with her. The news spread quickly across Illinois and Wisconsin, sparking outrage and heartbreak. Friends and family members gathered outside Alisha's home, lighting candles and leaving flowers. Her mother, Anicich, arrived to identify her daughter's body. The pain on her face became an image that many would never forget. For Sherry, the loss was unbearable. Not just of her daughter, but of the grandchild she would never hold. As detectives built their case, the evidence against Cooper grew overwhelming. His DNA was everywhere in the room. His phone contained messages showing his obsession with Alisha, his repeated attempts to convince her to be with him, and her polite rejections. Investigators concluded that the crime was not spontaneous. It was fueled by rejection, control, and entitlement, emotions that had simmered for months until they exploded in violence. By the time the autopsy report was finalized, there was no doubt about the brutality of the act. The public's reaction was swift and furious. How could a man who claimed to care for someone commit such a monstrous act? And worse, why had no one seen it coming? As Cooper sat in his cell awaiting trial, the story began to grow beyond the small Wisconsin town. It became a symbol of obsession, control, and the silent dangers of saying yes one last time to someone who refused to hear no. When the trial of Brian Cooper began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, locals, and members of Alisha Bromfield's family. The air inside felt tense, heavy with grief and anger. Cameras were not allowed during proceedings, but journalists described the scene vividly. Cooper sitting motionless in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor, while Alisha's mother watched him from the front row with an expression that carried both heartbreak and fury. The case had become one of the most publicized in Wisconsin's history, not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the victim's innocence. The prosecution opened with a chilling account of the night of the murder. They presented security footage from the resort, showing Cooper and Alisha returning to their room after the wedding. They then revealed messages and call logs from Cooper's phone that painted a clear picture of obsession. He had sent her dozens of texts in the weeks before her death, expressing jealousy and frustration that she didn't reciprocate his feelings. The prosecutor described how Cooper used alcohol as an excuse for rage, but his actions were deliberate. He waited until she was alone, intoxicated himself to remove inhibitions, and committed the act in a fit of possessive anger. The defense, however, tried to shift the narrative. They argued that Cooper was too intoxicated to form intent. His lawyers claimed he had consumed an excessive amount of alcohol, nearly a full bottle of whiskey, and therefore was not in control of his actions. They insisted that he didn't plan to kill Alisha and should not face a life sentence for a crime committed under extreme intoxication. To the family, it sounded like an insult, an attempt to reduce the murder of their daughter and her unborn child to a drunken mistake. As witnesses testified, the courtroom was filled with raw emotion. Investigators recounted the scene they had found that morning: Alisha's body, the overturned furniture, and the trail of evidence that led straight to Cooper. A forensic expert detailed how the bruising pattern around her neck showed sustained pressure, meaning her killer didn't lose control for a moment. He had time to stop and chose not to. When Cooper's taped confession was played, the room went silent. His voice cracked as he described his state of mind, alternating between tears and flat indifference. "I was drunk," he repeated. "I just wanted her to love me." The prosecutor countered sharply that intoxication was no excuse for taking a life. It was not a lapse of judgment. It was domination, control, and rage. Alicia's mother, Sherry, took the stand toward the end of the trial. Her voice trembled as she described the moment she found out her daughter was gone. She spoke about Alicia's plans, her excitement for motherhood, and the nursery she had begun preparing. The courtroom wept as she explained how her daughter's life, and that of her unborn grandchild, had been stolen in a single night. After weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. They returned with a unanimous verdict. Brian Cooper was guilty of first-degree intentional homicide and third-degree sexual assault. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yet, as the verdict was read, Sherry realized something devastating. Cooper was not charged for the death of her granddaughter, Ava. Under Wisconsin law, unborn children were not recognized as separate victims in homicide cases. To Sherry, this was another injustice, one that would fuel her determination to fight for change. The trial had ended, but her battle for true justice was only beginning. The courtroom verdict brought temporary relief but not peace. Brian Cooper was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Alisha Bromfield, but the absence of any charge for the death of her unborn child left a deep, aching wound. For Alicia's mother, Sherry Anicich, the verdict felt incomplete. Her daughter and granddaughter had both been taken from her, yet the law only recognized one life lost. That realization sparked something inside her, grief that demanded purpose. She decided that if the law couldn't honor her daughter's child, she would fight to change it. Sherry began her mission by reaching out to lawmakers, journalists, and advocacy groups. She was not a politician or an activist by nature, but her resolve was stronger than fear. She appeared in interviews, often holding a framed photo of Alisha smiling, her pregnant belly just beginning to show. She told her story countless times, sometimes through tears, sometimes through quiet determination. Her message was simple. No mother should have to stand in a courtroom and hear that her grandchild's life doesn't count. Her campaign gained traction quickly. Newspapers published feature articles about Alicia's Law, the proposed legislation that would allow prosecutors to charge killers with the death of an unborn child if the mother was murdered. People from across Wisconsin and neighboring states rallied behind her cause, inspired by her strength. She met with senators, attended hearings, and spoke at universities, turning her personal tragedy into a movement for change. Each time she spoke publicly, she kept her daughter's name alive. Meanwhile, Brian Cooper remained in prison, occasionally making headlines when his legal team filed appeals. They argued that his confession had been made under duress, that his mental state had not been properly evaluated, and that the sentence was too harsh given his intoxication. Each appeal was denied. The courts repeatedly upheld his conviction, reaffirming the evidence of premeditation. But the constant resurfacing of his name in the news was painful for Sherry. Every article brought back memories she wished she could forget. Over the years, Sherry transformed her pain into advocacy. She worked with other families of homicide victims who faced similar injustices. Together, they formed a network of support and awareness. Her story was featured in television documentaries and true crime programs, spreading beyond Wisconsin to a national audience. Through it all, she never lost focus. Her daughter's memory would drive her until the law was changed. By 2020, Alicia's Law had become a symbol of perseverance. Legislators cited it as an example of how victims' families could inspire reform. Although passing such laws was a slow and complex process, Sherry's voice remained steady. She attended every hearing even when progress seemed impossible. The fight was no longer just about Alisha. It was about every unborn child who died in silence, without recognition. Even as the years passed, Sherry never allowed her daughter's story to fade into another statistic. She continued to visit Alicia's grave, laying flowers for both her and Ava. On the headstone were two names, mother and child, carved together as one. It was a quiet reminder of love, loss, and the relentless pursuit of justice. What had started as one woman's grief had become a movement that gave hope to others, proving that even in tragedy, a voice determined enough can change the law and touch countless lives. More than a decade after the murder, the name Alisha Bromfield still echoes in conversations about justice and reform across North America. Her story became a symbol, a reminder of how one act of senseless violence could ripple through time, transforming grief into purpose. By 2025, the small Wisconsin resort where the crime took place had been sold and renamed. The new owners tried to distance the property from its past, but locals still remembered. To those who lived nearby, it was not just another crime scene. It was a place that carried a shadow, a reminder of the night innocence was destroyed. Visitors sometimes claimed to feel uneasy walking the quiet hallways late at night. The room where Alicia's life was taken had been sealed off for years before being renovated. But whispers about it never truly stopped. Housekeepers spoke of strange chills or lights flickering briefly, while others insisted it was just imagination. Yet every local knew the story, and every retelling ended with the same reflection, that what happened there changed lives forever. Sherry Anicich continued her fight well into the next decade. Her determination led to wider recognition of Alicia's Law, which influenced discussions in multiple states. Even where the legislation had not yet passed, it inspired debate about how the justice system valued victims and unborn lives. Sherry attended conferences, crime victim panels, and awareness events, speaking about domestic violence, workplace harassment, and the dangers of ignoring obsessive behavior. Her voice became a force for prevention, not just remembrance. For many, the murder of Alisha Bromfield served as a tragic warning about the subtle beginnings of obsession. People who heard the story began to recognize the signs. The possessiveness disguised as kindness, the manipulation masked as care. Schools and workplaces started using her case in training programs about harassment and safety, teaching young people to trust their instincts and set firm boundaries. Out of tragedy came awareness that might save others. In prison, Brian Cooper remained emotionless and withdrawn. Reports from correctional staff described him as compliant but distant, rarely speaking to anyone. He occasionally sent letters requesting forgiveness, but Sherry never responded. She believed that some acts were beyond apology. He lived out his days surrounded by the concrete walls of the facility, while the memory of his crime existed far beyond them, in the laws, the news stories, and the hearts of those who refused to forget. On each anniversary of Alicia's death, her family gathered quietly at the cemetery. They placed flowers, lit candles, and spoke softly about the dreams she once shared, the baby room she had planned, the future she was building. Her grave had two names etched together, Alisha Bromfield and Ava, joined forever in memory. The pain never faded, but neither did the love. As the sun set behind the rows of gravestones, Sherry would often stand in silence, the breeze moving gently through the trees. The fight for justice had taken years, but her daughter's story had changed laws, opened minds, and perhaps even saved lives. In that quiet, she found peace, knowing that Alicia's name would never be forgotten. The story of her life and death had become more than a headline. It had become a lesson, a legacy, and a voice for those who could no longer speak. The murder of Alisha Bromfield is more than just a crime. It's a heartbreaking reminder of how obsession, when ignored, can destroy innocent lives. Her story stands as a voice for those silenced too soon, and a lesson in recognizing the dangers of control disguised as affection. Through the strength of her mother, Sherry Anicich, Alicia's legacy continues to inspire change, protect others, and shape the laws meant to bring justice. If you believe every story deserves to be heard, subscribe now for more real true crime documentaries that seek truth, honor victims, and never let their memories fade.